Thank you very much. So as Mike said, I'm going to be speaking about two different things this evening. One is science and the other is law. But before we get into the discussion of preborn human rights, in order to have an intelligent discussion about preborn human rights, we first have to ask and answer a much more fundamental question. And that question is, what is it? What is it? What is the preborn child? Once we've answered that question, we can have an intelligent discussion about preborn human rights. Now, I'm a Christian, and one source of authority I can turn to in order to answer that question is the Bible. The Bible actually has plenty to say about who the preborn child is, what our relationship to the child ought to be, and what the law's relationship to the preborn child ought to be. I've got about a dozen Bible texts up on that screen there. We don't have time this evening to go through all of them. I'm just going to highlight 4 for you right now. One text from Job 31 suggests that the preborn child is a member of the human family. They're one of us. And so if they're one of us, they ought to be treated like one of us. Another text from Exodus 21. There, from the law of Moses, it's made clear that there must be serious penal consequences for any harm caused to a preborn child, either intentionally or through negligence. And this is particularly applied to a third actor. So not the mother, but another person who causes harm to the mom and the baby. Another principle from Scripture is from Proverbs 24, where there it says that the preborn child needs to be spoken for. The preborn child is one of many vulnerable groups in society, and Proverbs 24 suggests to us, in fact commands us, to speak up for those who are vulnerable. And a last principle from Deuteronomy 24. There it says that the preborn child should not pay for the mistakes or crimes of her father. That makes sense, doesn't it? That only seems just and fair. So those are just a few of the principles from the Bible that tell us who the preborn child is, what our relationship to that child ought to be, and what the law's relationship to the child ought to be. But perhaps some of you here tonight are not Christians and you don't see Scripture as authoritative. Is there another source of authority that we can turn to, that we both see as a source of authority, in order to answer that question, what is the preborn child? And the answer is yes, there is. In fact, it's the sciences, represented here by this cool double helix DNA strand. So what do the sciences say about the preborn child? Well, there's 4 characteristics that the sciences can tell us. The first is the child is complete. The second is that she is unique. The third, she's living. And the fourth is she is human. So let's go through each of those together. First, the preborn child is complete. The science of embryology teaches us that from the moment of fertilization on, when egg and sperm fuse together, from that moment forward, the preborn child is a complete being. Another word would be whole. From that moment forward, all that child needs is time and a safe environment in which to grow. And that child, that zygote at the first stage, will develop into an embryo, will develop into a fetus, will develop into an infant, will develop into a toddler, will develop into a child, will develop into an adolescent, will develop into an adult, given a safe space in which to thrive and time. So embryology teaches us that that child is complete from the first stage forward. Nothing needs to be added to them. They only need to grow and develop. The second characteristic comes from the science of genetics. There we know that the preborn child is unique. DNA tells us that. In fact, the preborn child has her own eye color, her own hair color, her own blood type. She is distinct from her mother. So even though the preborn child is inside of her mother, she is a distinct, separate being. She's a unique being, not merely an appendage of her mother. The third characteristic is the preborn child is living. How do we know she's living? Well, from the laws of biology. Biology has all kinds of different qualifications for determining whether or not something is living. But the rule of thumb is that if it's growing, it's living. And the preborn child certainly is growing. From that first moment forward, especially in those first 8 weeks, that child is growing at a phenomenal rate. In fact, it develops from 1 cell into over 1 billion cells in the first 8 weeks alone. So certainly living, certainly growing. And the science of biology teaches us that. And the fourth characteristic is that the preborn child is human. How do we know she's human? Well, from the law of biogenesis. What's the law of biogenesis? Well, the law of biogenesis states that living things reproduce after their own kind. What does that mean? Well, let me give you an example. If we take a goldfish and we mate that goldfish with a goldfish, we will only ever get a goldfish. Very good. Law of biogenesis. Living things reproduce after their own kind. Likewise, if we take a male chicken known as a rooster and we mate that male chicken with a female chicken known as a hen, we will only ever get baby chickens known as chicks. Law of biogenesis. Living things reproducing after their own kind. Again, likewise, cats beget cats, dogs beget dogs. And when we take a male human being and that male human being reproduces with a female human being, we will only ever get, according to the sciences, a complete and unique living human being. We will not get, as some pro-choice advocates have suggested to me, a blob of tissue. Nor will we get, as some other pro-choice advocates have suggested to me, a parasite. No, we will only ever get a complete and a unique living human being. So, as we've toured across the country, we're coming to the end of the tour now. I've had the audience repeat that back to me just to make sure that they know what we're talking about, what the sciences say the preborn child is. So, what do the sciences say the preborn child is? The preborn child is complete, unique, living human being. A little on the weak side. Let's say it again, but with a little bit more pro-life jazz, all right? What do the sciences say the preborn child is? The preborn child is complete, unique, living human being. Excellent. And not only do we know that from the laws of science, not only do we know that from really cool looking ultrasound pictures, we now also know that from videographic evidence. Check it out.
8 weeks marks the end of the embryonic period. During this time, the human embryo has grown from a single cell into the nearly 1 billion cells which form over 4,000 distinct anatomic structures. The embryo now possesses more than 90% of the structures found in adults.